Welcome to the ADF Insider Essentials series, which demonstrates the essential skills, tips, tricks and techniques that you will require for building ADF applications. In this demonstration, you will see how an ADF Business Component model-driven list of value can be switched dynamically at runtime. My name is Frank Impfius, and I'm from the Oracle JDeveloper Product Management team. The use case we're implementing in this little session is where we have an order form, and this order form has two different values for the payment type. One is cash, the other is credit. If a user decides to pay cash, then the list of value that populates a payment detail field will list all the currencies that we're supporting. If the payment type is selected to be credit, then the same list of value would list all the credit card companies that we're working with. The runtime UI is a list of value that you launch from the list of value icon next to the payment detail field in this order form. The payment type ID, if it's set to 2 for the ADF Summit application, internally means this is a credit card payment, and for that reason, when the list of value comes up, it should list all the credit card companies in there. If the user sets the payment type ID to 1, which means paying by cash, then the same list of value should show a number of currencies that we are dealing with, that we are accepting as valid payment within our application. So let's have a look how this gets implemented in Oracle ADF. So this actually is the screen that you have seen on the PowerPoint before, and the payment type ID is set to 2, which in the ADF schema means this is a credit card payment. So when we launch the list of value next to the payment detail field, we would expect it to show a list of credit card companies. So here's the list of credit card companies, and now we can select one of them and have this value being returned to the payment detail field. So what if the user decided to pay cash? So let's clean the Visa string out here and change the payment type ID from 2 to 1. And you see I do this without refreshing the form. So there's an auto submit sending this new value to the model, and the model will then dynamically change the list of value, because my expectation now is that when I hit the list of value button, instead of seeing a list of credit cards, I now want to see a list of currencies. And here you see the list of currencies. So let's pretend that we're paying in euro. And the list of value returned euro to the payment detail field. So let's do the same for a table. Here we do have value set to 1, which we know is cash. Here's the value set to 2, which we know is credit card. So let's click this list of value icon here. To bring up the search form, and you can already see that this form is for credit card search. And you see the field is updated with the Amex string. So let's pick a cash field. And you see this brings up the currency table in the list of value. And this updates the payment detail field now with the Russian ruble. So let's have a look at how you build this sample. First of all, as you see, we use ADF Business Components as the business service in our model project. In here we have 4 view objects defined. One for credit card, one for the currency, one for orders, and one for the payment type. The list of value is defined in the order view, So let's open the order view by a double click on the view object. And here we see that we have a payment type ID defined and a payment detail attribute defined. And this is all read from the database table that we have defined in the ADF Summit schema. There's one transient attribute I defined, which is called the payment type ID translated, and I will show you in a minute what that is for. So let's click on the payment detail attribute, and for this payment detail attribute we defined two list of values. You create a list of value by pressing the plus sign next to the list of value header. So if I click on this plus sign, then a dialog comes up, and this allows me to create model driven list of values in ADF Business Components. I need to select from a list data source, or just click another green plus sign to select a view object that produces the list of data for the list of value from the available view objects list. Once I did that, I can then go and specify which of the columns or attributes of that view object contain actually the value that I want to copy into the attribute. So in this case, the payment detail attribute. So I would select ISO, which is just giving me the ISO value of the currency, and then I map the payment detail attribute to the ISO. Then I go to UI hints, and in the UI hints I can specify what information do I want to display in the list of value, and which information I want to make available to the user when the user search within the list of value screen. Most important is that you select a default list type which you put to input text with list of values. In our case we did this already when we created the two list of values. If this is the first list of value you created, then this is a drop down list that allows you to choose between a choice list, a combo box list, or an input text with list of values. Once you've chosen a component for one of the list of values, all additional list of values you create will have to take the same type, and for that reason this information is grayed out. So let's have a look how the cache list of value is defined. So for this I select cache, and then I click on this pencil icon next to the list of values page, and this brings up exactly the same dialog with the same settings as before. You see I selected ISO, territory and currency to be displayed within the list of value. One thing I want to point out is that I named the list of value cache. This allows me later to make it easy for me to switch to the list of value I want to show, because I have to have a discriminator column, and this discriminator column in my view object will tell which list of value should be shown and displayed at runtime for the row that is current. Now if I would have chosen a different string than cache, like cache LOV or cache option or choice, then I would have to have an additional mapping within my code which would map between the value that I can get from the dependent attribute, so that it exactly would know which list of value would be associated to that. So I just used the actual value that comes from the database, which is cache in this case, and credit for the other list of value, which basically just looks up the credit card view, and then on the view UI hints has exactly the same setting, beside of that it has different sets of attributes to display ID and card name in this case. So these are my two list of values that I'm switching back and forth between. Now I mentioned that I needed to have a list of value switcher, or what I would refer to as a discriminator column. Now this is my payment type ID translated transient field. Because my payment type ID just returns 1 or 2, which are the values kept in the database, I needed to find a way to translate these values to the representative cash or credit value, which then actually is used here within my list of values switcher to switch between the 2 list of values. One is named cash, the other one is named credit. So let's have a look at the payment type ID translated. So this, as I mentioned, is a transient attribute, which means it doesn't have any representation in the entity or the database. And because I just needed it as a kind of a temporary persistent store, I set its definition to be an expression, and here I used a groovy expression. And this groovy expression queries the application module, tries to find the all payment types view object, and then calls a method on that view object passing the current value of the payment type ID. Now the payment type ID is one of the attributes we have in the order view. Yeah, so I read this directly from the current row of that view object. I could of course have a simplified groovy string. I could just look at payment type, payment type ID. If I look at this, if that is 1, I could say, well, this is cash, and if not, it's credit. Now this would work the same. The problem with that is that this is very static, because if you add different payment methods to your database infrastructure, then you will always have to remember to change that groovy expression here. So better is to have this very dynamic, reading it from a table, and then have some sort of method exposed on a view object to provide the translated string for you. So if I go to the payment type view, which is here, and I double click on that, then what you see is, first of all, it has 3 fields: an ID field, which is 1 or 2, and the payment type, which then is cash or credit. Clicking on the Java options and on the pencil next to it, I was able to create an implementation class, because this is the class actually that would hold the logic, the Java logic, for me to get the translated value cash or credit based on the input payment ID 1 or 2. So let's open the editor, and this here basically is the only bit of Java I needed to write. So you see that there's a method called getPaymentTypeTranslated, which is the same method that actually the transient object or attribute called in its groovy expression, and it passed in an ID as a long value, so the type is long. So what I do is I just get access to this view object's row set and query the row set for the ID. I ask for it give me the row based on the key, which is the ID I get in, and then return the payment type attribute value, which then is cash or credit. So this little method is accessed by the groovy string on my transient attribute. So ADF source, which is a reference to ADF Business Components, get application module just gets access to the application module it is in, find the view object, all payment types, and then call the method get payment type translated, pass in the current row ID for the payment type ID. So and then for the payment details, the payment type ID translated is selected as the attribute switcher component. If I wanted to change the list of value type being used, so currently we used input text with list of value, I could do this here. This would then change the type of the list of value component being used at runtime for all of the list of values I've defined. So I'm happy with the input text list of values, so I keep on going with that. And now next is to look how we can verify that what we have actually is working. And for this we do have the integrated tester in ADF Business Components. So even without writing an ADF Faces application to that, we can test if our logic works. So with the Business Components tester coming up, I double click on the all submit orders, and this shows the form I'm actually working with in the web UI as well. And as you can see here, the payment ID type is set to 2, which means credit card, and the payment type translated, which is the groovy string reaching out to the public method in the view object definition, actually shows that it's credit now. So this is referenced internally by the list of value switcher in ADF Business Components. So that means when I hit this button here, it should show the credit card list of value. And in fact it does. So when I navigate within this list of records I have, then you see the next one has a value setting of cash. So obviously this current row is different from the other one. So hitting this button should bring up a different list of value, and actually it does. So now let's clear out this field, change this value to credit card, and click this button again, and you see it switches to credit card. So this actually shows you quite nicely how dynamically this list of value is switched, and that there is really no effort in ADF Business Components to implement that. So the next step is to see how this gets implemented when you build the view on top of that. So I switched to the view controller view. Here I have a JSPX document which contains a panel tab component with a form and a table representation of the submit order views. I showed you that at runtime, so we can go straight into what's required on the view layer side to get the use case working based on the model that we already created. So if you wanted to create the form, what you would do is you would actually grab that collection here, move it over, release the mouse button, and choose ADF form. In the ADF form, you see that the types are already set and the payment detail field is pre-configured as a list of value. Now that's the whole reason why we have model-driven list of value, to make sure that the application developer doesn't need to set up the list of value and doesn't need to think about it. They would just use that. The payment type ID translated is not what we need to show on the screen, so we hit the delete button, and that would remove the attribute from the form. You can also set this on the attribute itself in the model, in which case there's a UI hint that you can set to visible or non-visible, and depending on this settings, the attribute shows or doesn't show in this dialog. If I want to navigate within the form, I choose to have a navigation control and a submit button if I want to update the form, which makes sense. So I did that already, as you can see here. So I do have my input form, and I do have the payment ID attribute and the payment detail field, and they are dependent in the sense that if the user updated the type ID, changing it from 1 to 2, then this field has to respond in that it has to show a different set of list of values. So for this one, I set auto submit equals true, which means that whenever the user changes the value of that field, as soon as they step out of that, it will send a partial submit to the server to tell the model about the change of that value, so that in the next step, the list of value, when you click on this list of value launch button, shows the correct list. And then if we go back here to the table, which I also implemented, then I did exactly the same here. I do have a payment type here, and I do have the payment detail here. I set the payment type input text field to auto submit true. But that was all that I needed to do. So you remember, when I run this, I could first of all see different list of values behavior based on the current row that was selected, plus I could select a value from the list of value, and it was updating the current row in the table. So let's rehearse what we did. So we created two lists of values for the payment detail attribute, and this list of values are switched between. For this, we created a transient attribute that holds the values cash or credit at runtime, and this transient attribute is used as an LOV switcher to tell the business components framework which LOV data to query and to show in the list of value when the list of value button is hit. On the view layer side, all we had to do is to make sure that we issue an auto submit just in case that the payment type ID is changed by the user working with the form. And this is exactly the same as if the user worked in the form or in an editable table. To summarize, model-driven list of values in ADF Business Components are easy to create and are also easy to switch at runtime. This sample that I showed throughout the video is available as sample 89 on the ADF Code Corner website. You can download the workspace and additional documentation I wrote up for this sample. So the URL you see just below, that's ADF Code Corner. If you go to #Code Corner samples, it directly brings you to the area where sample 89 is what you want to look for. If you want to learn more about ADF and how to work with that, or more tricks, then first of all we want to go to the ADF Insider and the ADF Insider Essentials page, which is referenced from the Oracle JDeveloper homepage at otn.oracle.com/products/jdev, or as shown here on the slide, oracle.com/technology/jdev. There you get product downloads, tutorials, access to the discussion forum, additional samples, and a collection of blog sites and articles that we collect for application developers to learn ADF and to get up to speed with it. This concludes this presentation. Thanks for watching, and see you again on ADF Insider.